Those are the high contributors. So I think that whatever we think about the political role of schools, I think that we have to move from this industrial model of filling heads with curriculum to a very, very different model of how do we... Because my son, he told me the problem about this high school is that you can't be interested in anything. Basically what he was telling me is that if you want to have reasonable grades, you have to run from one class to the other, do what the teacher says, and you are not allowed to be interested. I was thinking, my goodness, what have we done? My experience of the high contributors are not people who run from class to class. My experience of the high contributors are people who are really interested in something. You know? So, have we created an institution that at the most formative years of a person prevent someone from having that experience? I think we need to really question, what does it mean to educate learning citizens that are going to be contributors? And so I would say, you as teachers have the responsibility of understanding what this means practically. Look, if it is true that those teachers who had an influence on me were people who were passionate about something and invited me into their passion for a little bit, why is it that passion is nowhere on the criteria list of qualifying for being a teacher? It's not even talked about. We have gone so far into a view of knowledge as this kind of dead thing that can be put in a curriculum and imparted into heads and then good tests to see, yes, it has made it into that head. See what I mean? I can promise you it has made it into that. I've tested it. Here's your student, mathematically enabled. Assembly line, go home. It's almost like we've forgotten that this is not all that knowing is about. Not to say that there should not be a curriculum. You see, I'm not saying that there should not be some discussions about what do we teach and what not. But if the curriculum has filled 4 years of a student's life where they have to tell you, I'm not allowed to be interested in anything for 4 years, the most formative years of my life, I think we've gone too far. I think we've gone too far with this business of curriculum. So.
You're saying that you have to be passionate about a certain subject in order to teach it. Say you're passionate about maths, but you're teaching an English class. Can you still be a good teacher?
I would think twice, if I was a headmaster, about putting someone to teach something that they don't care about. If you want to light up the love for literature in a student, you're going to have that love yourself, because you cannot manufacture it. Yeah.
In your encounter with the wine taster, you got a glimpse into a rich and exciting world, but you decided not to join that world because it didn't fit with your sense of identity. When we're dealing with reluctant learners, possibly from deprived backgrounds, what we're asking, and particularly, for instance, if we're talking about going to university, we're asking them to enter a world where they're going to possibly feel quite uncomfortable. It's going to be very different to what they're used to. It might alienate them from their families and from their peers. How can we persuade those people to go against their sense of identity and still enter the world that we're inviting them into?
If I had the answer to what you're saying, I would try to become a Minister of Education. I'm not quite ready for prime time in that sense, right? But before you love something, you have to try it, right? But I think that, at least from my theoretical perspective, I think you will not be able to completely bypass the fact that you have to offer people an identity in whatever you want to push them into. That ethnographer I was telling you about, she was asking these questions to these different groups of girls. What she was interested in was just why is it that these girls in this group pronounce English in this way? That was her interest. Once these students believed that she had no other agenda but to just understand who they were and what they were trying to express by pronouncing English in that way, she said it was like opening a floodgate. And we were thinking, maybe those kids have lived in this institution for a long time. They've never met someone It was not a role in an institution. All of a sudden, these kids from very poor working class background were asking us, so what is it to be a professor in a university? What is it like? Tell me. You know, and I have no idea. It's completely outside of the scope of what I can think about because I've never met someone. See what I mean? All of a sudden, here was a real identity open to them as a person to person. And they were very interested in what it was like to be in a university. But they didn't trust the school to tell them the real story. Yeah.
Have you seen any examples, apart from your own experiences at school, of where communities in practice have been working well?
Yeah, but the places where I've seen work well is more in workplace context, where people have a passion together. So people who are passionate about rural water supplies at the World Bank have formed a little community. And from different countries, they help each other develop a practice of doing that well. For them, their belonging to that community is an essential part of how they view themselves as able to do the job that they do. It's a kind of peer-to-peer partnership where they recognize each other as, okay, you're interested in that too. So let's work it out together. How do we do this thing that is very difficult? And I've seen many, many examples of that. Actually, most of my work today is not in education. Most of my work today is in work context, where traditionally vertical organizations that have viewed knowledge as a vertical process of extracting knowledge from practice, creating a curriculum or a training program and then serving it back, or a procedure and serving it back. These organizations are saying, maybe we need to start thinking differently about learning, and we need to encourage people creating this horizontal learning partnership. We call them committees of practice. Some people may call them learning networks, whatever. I have seen that work also in some educational context, where some teachers have actually agreed to break the walls of their classroom and the solitude of the traditional teaching experience, and to actually form communities among themselves to help each other experience what it is to be a teacher. So instead of just having this vertical view of a source of knowledge that pours down knowledge into a recipient of knowledge, to say, okay, now it's a mutual negotiation of like, what do you know, what do I know? And how do these two forms of knowledge meet each other in a way that's meaningful and productive? It's a very different approach. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to challenge something you said, that's all. Yeah. When you said that teacher trainers are trying to get trainees to impart a curriculum, I just want to challenge that as a man of straw and perhaps ask you to justify the statement.
I'm certainly not putting teacher trainers or future teacher down or anything, you know. I'm just trying to sort of open a window to say, okay, we've focused a lot here. Is there also something else we should learn to focus on? And you see, the reason why I'm not trying to become the Minister of Education, because I remember actually I was talking about this idea in Canada, and the Minister of Education was there in the province of Alberta, and he asked me, so what should I do? And I had to admit that I was happy I was not the Minister of Education of the province of Alberta, because I'm not exactly sure myself how to take that into an institutional setting and how to institutionalize that, right? Because if it is true that identity and the transformation of identity is at the core of the educational enterprise, then how do you institutionalize that? I think the theory would show some kind of directions to move towards, like having traversed a boundary of practice that really kind of shakes your identity. Could that become part of how we think about the curriculum? You know what I mean? We think so much about the curriculum in terms of information, but could we think about every student must, at least one in their life, have experienced the crossing of a boundary where on the other side of that boundary, the identity doesn't function. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like for me, moving from Switzerland to the US when I was 20-something. All of a sudden, living in a place where my identity, that nice little Swiss identity I had formed that was so successful in Switzerland, just doesn't work. You see, there is a discipline of identity. If you start thinking about knowing an identity as being related, then it's not like, I'm suggesting that we ask our kids, so what do you feel like doing today? But if there is one thing you're interested in, and I don't care if it is playing the guitar or if it is swimming the breaststroke, but for that thing you're interested in, we're going to ask you to reach the level where you can interact with the masters of that practice. But my son was not given that experience by his school. He had to do this outside of school, So maybe we think, okay, this is not the role of schools. To give that transformative experience of pushing all the way into a practice and reaching mastery, What does that do to you? What kind of discipline of the being does it take, to do that? It's almost more important than what domain you do it in, because that experience of knowing what it takes to become really, really good at something, to become really interested, to become really passionate, is something that is probably transferable as your interests change in life. But if you've never had that through 12 years of schooling, are you ready? Are you ready for life? I don't know. I think that I need to do my own time management because we were supposed to be done a while back, and I'm terrible, even though I was born in Switzerland. I'm terrible at time management. I would like them to remember that thinking of learning, of teaching as a transmission of a curriculum is only a limited perspective on learning, and that to think of learning as a development of a full identity as a human being is another perspective that can enrich their life. And so, really, I wish you well in your ambition to become a teacher. I think that this is one of the great vocations that there can be. But I think it is also true that you are going to enter institutions that often doesn't recognize the very essence of that vocation. And so I think it's going to take some discipline for you to keep that flame alive wherever it is that you are that you're going to practice your craft. So really, all the best to you. Thank you. I'm hoping that what students will take away from this lecture is a question about how learning can be made meaningful for students who have a life beyond the classroom, who are full human beings. And so I'm going to ask them to live that question in their life.